Welcome to Me Reimagined, a space where we step into the impossible version of ourselves, a version we only dream of, so we can create lives we love and the impact we are meant to make.
So this episode is for the woman who's done all the work and is wondering what the hell is going on. Feels like you're slip sliding. You're going backwards. How did you get here again? I think the thing to remember is that you're not there again. You're in a totally different space. I can remember the first time I started doing this work. I basically thought I was unpacking all of those emotional suitcases when I first started learning to feel and process emotions, and that once I got them emptied, that they would just be light, and then I could just put them in the basement and store them away, and then I'd be walking around without them. Can you imagine my surprise when I realized that, holy shit, I was still gonna get angry. I was still gonna be triggered. I was still gonna feel sad and resentful and all of the things. And then there was a period of time where I just started welcoming, really loving the human experience and feeling all these emotions that I hadn't felt, because when you turn that switch off, you don't feel much of anything, the good or the bad. And that feels great in the beginning because the bad feels pretty bad. But then once you realize that all the things that are on the other side of the coin, you don't have those either, then it starts to feel not so great. So here I was starting to feel this flood of emotions, and I felt very much like that. You know, when you have a hose and you haven't a fire hose and you haven't quite um figured out how to put your thumb on the nozzle and it's and it stops. For those of you who can't see me, I just released the nozzle and it exploded. Um, but basically that's what I felt like with my emotions. They were coming out in spurts, totally uncontrollably at some points. And then I got really good at kind of regulating the flow. And I think that's kind of what this work is like. So I've done a whole lot of work, and I just went through a relationship. I was dancing in the kitchen at the end of this one versus my divorce. And I find myself in another relationship wondering, what is going on? This one's just started. How am I here again? So, who else has felt that in some area of their life? Whether it's at a job and you start a new one and you think, "Okay, I don't have the same boss, so it's gonna be okay." And then you find yourself in a meeting, like, literally steam coming out of your ears, and you think, "I don't understand. I'm in an entirely different situation." Maybe you even switched industries. And so you wonder, "Is it not working? Am I doing this work and it's not working? Why am I here again?" And I do think there's something to that idea that life gives you what you need to learn until you learn it. So you bang your head against the tree, right? Until you find the lesson, you absorb it and begin to embody it. But if you're like me, then you're wondering, what the hell is going on? Because I did absorb it, I did embody it, and now I'm running into the same wall. But that's the key. It's not the same wall. It's a different wall. And I agree with Esther Perel, who said in a podcast on Diary of a CEO that we aren't doing this work for ourselves. We're doing this work for other people because we're always in relation with other people. And so, where we can do the work on ourselves, it isn't primarily for us, it's so that our relationships get better. And then as your relationships get better, you feel better. because we're social creatures. And so when you feel embedded in the relationship, when you feel that you belong to yourself and to the community that you're in, then you realize that's why I do the work that I do. Because without that, your relationships feel conflicted. They're full of conflict. Your interactions with others might feel empty. And so as we do this work, it's important to remember that you're not where you were. You're just in a new constellation. And the new constellation is bringing up things for you to look at, but you are a different person. You are approaching this new thing from a whole different space than you were in 6 months ago, 5 years ago. And so what you're gonna get out of it and what you're gonna learn isn't what you learned then, even though it might seem similar, eerily similar in some cases, to what you went through. But what I'd like you to think about is that we can make this fun, right? So to give you my personal example, I had felt a lot like I was not enough in my last relationship. Actually, I felt like I was not enough in life long before this relationship. This relationship just happened to trigger it in the ways that we communicated. And so essentially, what that gave me was the opportunity to practice over and over, returning to myself, coming into myself in a way that gave me the safety, gave me the compassion and the love that I was looking for. And so without this relationship, I mean, I probably could have done this at work and in other places as well, but it just happened to be that I found a relationship to practice within. You're in relationship in all areas of your life, whether it's personal or professional. So you can use whatever you find. In fact, there was a woman at work that I very much could have practiced with because she triggered me to no end related to the self-worth piece and credibility in particular. And so now that I find myself in a new relationship and the same thing is coming up in terms of self-worth, but the lesson I'm taking here isn't the process of how do I connect to myself? How do I give myself that? The lesson that I'm taking here, and that's my dad calling to say thank you for the Father's Day gift. Um, which actually I gave him a book that was healing and slow cooked food and put them together, and it's good for your gut health. And I do think that gut health is one of those things that really influences how we're able to react and respond to triggers. Um, and how we're able to work through a lot of this emotional stuff because you're doing life on one level and then on another level, you are doing a whole other life, a whole other job because you're in this emotional world. And then on a third level, you've got your spiritual work. And so at any one time, life can feel very complicated. But to go back to what I was talking about before, sorry, I'm going to make a point there. Um, I gave my dad this book, and I think when our gut health, when our sleep is regulated, when we're doing all the things that support us, then this work gets easier. But now to go back to the point that I was making before he called and I got interrupted, it's that I'm no longer learning that process. I have learned that. The difference is I'm now using that in a relationship with somebody who communicates, and it's a whole nother game. So that same feeling is still often coming up. I just went up to his place for the weekend, and I was stressed when I arrived. And what comes up for me and the lesson that I'm learning is that when I am stressed, I disconnect. I'm not connected here. I didn't do the process. And I moved through that encounter not present. And he noticed. And the fact that he noticed is actually a plus because in my last relationship, that wouldn't have been the case. So this is a whole new level. The difference is I didn't react well when he noticed because I thought, I'm not doing this. Like I'm already worked through this. This isn't a thing. And then upon further reflection to the point where I actually feel a bit rocked today. Like I feel as if I've been doing those 3 jobs, the regular job, the emotional job, and the spiritual job. And I feel slow. I feel, um, emotionally tired. Um, and I could use some of that slow cooker healing food that my father has. So the point of this is just to show you, to illustrate that when you're in that new situation, there's something different to learn, even though it might be the same trigger, even though it might be the same theme or focus. And so there are lots of different things you can do to play with this. So I sat down and wrote down all of the way I decided to journal. That was my particular method this morning. And so I wrote down all the stuff and then I flipped it for myself. And then I thought, you're doing a lot of the reframing again. So what you can do is get under the story, go into the energy. And that is, I think, partly why I feel rocked, meaning the energy work that I've been doing with Dr. Sue Morter it's game changing. It almost takes you out of this reality into a much bigger reality, which is a beautiful thing because then it puts this in context. And this trigger for me is small. So when you do that, the thing that you're encountering that feels so big, that feels like this insurmountable obstacle because you saw it before, you're seeing it again. Have you not moved? You have moved. And then you do the energy work and it shows you A, how far you've come, and B, that the story is so much bigger than this obstacle and it's not insurmountable. It's actually the same size as you and it's created by you. And so that's quite a different feeling to get under the story because then the story begins to almost evaporate. When you come back from the energy work and you're opening your eyes and you're here and in this reality in front of you, it's suddenly that energetic story doesn't match the vibration that you have now. So it just kind of dissipates. And I don't necessarily have an explanation for where I'm at and what I'm going to be doing and working on, but it doesn't get in your way the way it does before when you're really stuck in story and story is right here. And when I say right here, I'm putting glasses on my eyes because those are the lenses that you're looking through. And so I journaled. I got out of the energy. I shifted my state, essentially, is what I did. You can also dance. That's what Idun likes to do, my co-founder and great friend. You can exercise. And when I say exercise, I don't mean the light jog. I mean, you can exercise by pushing yourself to the limit. That works. You can meditate. You can have a belly laughter. Like when you're watching, I don't know, for me, sometimes it's an old Friends episode or Sex in the City, and you're laughing at something ridiculously stupid and just crying. It's so funny. Or you call a friend and you have a laugh. but it needs to be that deep belly laughter. So there's lots of different things you can do to change your state, but once you put it in context and you get out of story and you change your state, then you could play a game. You could create a dialogue. Sometimes I call it an inner counsel, and I do with it's a cross between IFS, internal family systems, and just play. But I created a council of different voices in my head that talk from the different perspectives. So, there's the worried woman, the anxious woman who feels like we're not doing it right. Literally, the not being enough is about we're not doing not enoughness correctly. Anyway, um, and then there's the frustrated one who thinks we should be better, who thinks we should move it along. You should be past this. And then there's the tender one who just wishes this would be over. She's got a little bit of a baby voice. And they have a conversation between them. And it's quite interesting to let all of those voices out and be heard. Because once they're heard, once they have shared what they're trying to give you, the way becomes much clearer. And that's what you want in the end of the day, right? That's why you're doing this work. What is the path that gets you closer to your fullest expression, that gets you closer to your purpose, that gets you in better relationship with other people? What is that way, and how do you make it align? How do you embody how do you bring it forth from inside you? So my goal is to make it such that when people are near me, they feel like they can exhale. I actually got that idea from Idun, who wants to be that for her niece and nephew. And it matched, I hadn't used the word exhale, but it matched the idea that I had a while back, and I created a company around it called Walking Shelters, which you'll look at the name and think, well, it's no wonder that didn't really take off. But essentially, I think the idea is incredibly beautiful that you create such a sense of safety, such a sense of love, such a sense of vulnerability, a strength, such a sense of warmth inside yourself where you don't feel lonely, where you feel safe to actually feel all the feels, such that you are able to offer that to other people and they can sense it when they come in contact with your energy, that you help ground them. Do you have anybody like that in your life already who can do that? I have not yet encountered somebody who can do that. But when they talk about people like the Dalai Lama, or there's a nun who's also a Buddhist Tibetan monk, um, called Pema Chodron, and I think she can do it. But those people that you come into contact with them and they just settle you without saying or doing anything, it's okay to show up exactly as you are. But what's so interesting is that we can't offer that to anybody else until we can do it for ourselves. And when we can do it for ourselves, my God, it's beautiful. And so that's what came up for me. Wasn't the process of how you do that. I worked that out a few years ago. What came up for me in this relationship is that I'm seen. And then I have to be willing to go into that with someone, which hasn't been the case so far. I've done it on my own. And then I have to be willing to welcome the unwelcome. That's literally what you have to do. Sit with it, right? Take those big emotions that come up when you don't feel enough at work, when you feel worried or nervous. Are you doing it right? And Sit with it so that when you're in that meeting room, you're not just speaking up, you're bringing it forth from inside you such that you are shaping the conversation because you have an intention for what you are creating everywhere you go. And so this podcast is simply just meant to be a reassurance for you that the way is not linear. I saw something on Instagram the other day that said we always think of it as A plus B equals C, and it showed it in a straight line in 3 boxes. Um, but then what it was actually like is much more of A, and then backwards, 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 and then a circle, and then a scribble, and and it ended up looking like this big, messy mind map of, you know, a journey. But the journey itself is the destination. And so as you're on that journey, you're right where you're supposed to be. You're not behind. You're not gonna fall too far behind and not be able to catch up. There's no urgency, there's no time pressure. You are learning this and responding and bringing out what's inside you and fully expressing yourself at the exact pace you're supposed to. So give yourself a big hug, give yourself a pat on the back, welcome all those messy emotions, and picture yourself in a wrinkle. Picture yourself in a squiggle, in a circle. It isn't a linear thing, A to B. And in fact, you're not going to be. Your B, the destination, is where you're at. So I want you to keep that in mind today as you move through your tasks that you have to do, the meetings that you have, the relationships that you're in, and give yourself grace because you are exactly where you're supposed to be. And this is the 2.0, the 3.0, the 4.0 version. This is not the same challenge that you encountered 3 years ago. With love.